Hello, everyone. I see the numbers increasing, folks trickling in. Happy Thursday. I'm sure all of us are preparing for the holidays and hopefully some time off from work. So thanks for taking the time to join us for our webinar today. For this month's series of our industry webinar series, we have a great webinar. So excited for us to be speaking today and get to learn from my wonderful colleague, Dave. The title of our webinar is the Great Bike Infrastructure Project Deep Dive, State and Local Bike Infrastructure Funding. So learning all the latest and greatest when it comes to bike infrastructure funding and what you can apply to your community to help move the needle for influential bike projects. So before we get started here, just a couple of housekeeping items. We will have live Q&A at the end, so please use the Q&A feature in the chat or the chat function as well throughout the webinar, and we'll answer questions at the end. I'm going to introduce quickly our speaker for today. As I had said once before, Dave Snyder. He's our Senior Director of Infrastructure here at People4Bikes, and an advocate with years and years of experience doing really great bike policies. So excited to learn more from you today. Excuse me. Okay, with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Dave. And let's get rolling.
Right on. Thank you so much, Ashley. Here is our agenda for today. After putting this webinar into the context of our campaign, the Great Bike Infrastructure Project, we'll talk about why state and local funding is so important. We'll give many examples of local and state funding for bike infrastructure, so many, one after the other, that you'll lose track. But that's okay, because everything that I'm talking about today is in our legislative strategies guide on our website, so you don't have to remember them all. We do hope that you'll remember a few short takeaways that we'll end with prior to a short discussion. But first, I want to share this quote. That's probably my favorite quote of our current president, and I want us to appreciate something for a moment. I think that we as a movement have won the rhetorical debate about the importance of bike infrastructure. In every public opinion poll that I've seen about infrastructure priorities, safe streets and active transportation are always near the top, very popular. I mean, here's a quick story to illustrate. I was at a hearing in the California State Senate a few years ago. Transportation Secretary Brian Kelly was giving a presentation about the state's entire $14 billion transportation budget. He devoted 6 minutes of his 10-minute presentation to biking and walking. 60% of his talking was about active transportation. Less than 3% of his budget was about active transportation. It was misleading, you could say. Rhetoric is not enough. We need the money. This webinar is intended to help you find that local and state funding to build the bike infrastructure that we know the public wants. First, let's start with an introduction to the Great Bike Infrastructure Project. It's the newest initiative from People4Bikes to advance bike infrastructure across the country. It's a 3-part campaign. One part is the National Bike Project Tracker. More than 1,200 pending bike projects are in our database and on this map. We'll support as many of those as we can with action alerts and support letters and more, and we'll track them in hopes that every last one of them will be constructed and bringing joy to people within just a few years. Another leg of the campaign is our investment in local communities. Select places where political leaders are willing to commit to build truly connected networks of all ages and abilities bikeways. From the Final Mile campaign that made transportational investments in 5 cities, we know the formula to win public support. It's listed there. We're working to execute that formula in as many cities as possible. We're raising funds right now. If you have a lead on local or national funding for this effort, please do let me know. And the third leg, the Great Bike Infrastructure Project, is the Legislative Strategies Guide. And that's what we're diving into today. It has diverse examples of policies from various levels of governments, along with key talking points in support of those policies. Today's deep dive is into the first of the 6 priorities listed: bike infrastructure funding. And if you think about it, the next two priorities are also about funding. A complete streets mandate, for example, essentially requires bike infrastructure to be funded as an integral part of a road project. And when we say we want to include bicycling in climate solutions, we're saying we want to include bicycling as we distribute the resources intended to reduce greenhouse gases, such as bike infrastructure or bike purchase incentives. The fact that funding underlies so much of our strategy speaks to the importance of getting the money for bike infrastructure. There are at least three reasons why it's important. Yes, there's an unprecedented amount of federal money available, but the US DOT is not going to march into your town with a checkbook and say, here, build bike infrastructure. No, that $13 billion is not all dedicated bike money. It's our estimate of what could support bike infrastructure if local leaders ask for it. And in many cases, that money is necessary as a match to even get the federal money. The second reason that local and state funding is so important is that federal funding isn't enough. Throughout the country, federal money rarely makes up more than 1/3 of what a local community spends on transportation. 2/3 is generally independent of the federal government. In California, that's as much as 4/5 of local funding is generated at the local and state level. So we need the local money, there's no doubt. The good news is that local money is easier to get. It's easier to convince local politicians of the need than it is to convince members of Congress, I think. Our local leaders are closer to us. Our local paper will cover our advocacy for protected bike lanes. We can send 100 bicyclists to City Hall, demanding bike trails or say the approval of a bike plan. So we have leverage at the local level to get funding for bike infrastructure. Let's take a deep dive now. We are going to look at all the various sources of local and state funding. In the next 10 minutes, we're going to look at each of these sources. It's a lot, I know, but like I said, you don't have to remember these. This presentation will be available for you later. And like I said, every example that I'm going to give is from the Legislative Strategies Guide on our website. The first one that I want to talk about is a general obligation bond. That's a debt taken on by a government backed by its own future revenue, usually property taxes. The best active transportation ballot measure I've ever seen is a general obligation bond approved in November of 2020 by the voters of Austin, Texas. They approved $460 million just for bike ped improvements. I want to talk about that campaign for a minute. This is from the campaign to get the council to put the bond measure on the ballot. Can you go? No, yeah. I love that they asked for even more revenue. They asked for $750 million. Audacious. I love it. They got $460 million finally put on the ballot, which is fantastic. Note that they never referred to this as a bike bond or an active transportation bond. It was a safe mobility bond. That's an important reason for why it passed. Safety for all, even drivers. Now, this is a graphic of all the things that it will fund. Like I said, it was 100% bike ped, but if you look at that graphic, it was appealing to everyone. Exactly one image shows a picture of a bike. That's the way that things like this pass. The next example that I want to show is from Wake Forest, North Carolina, a very different place. Recently, just last year, voters approved a $14.4 million bond for greenways as part of a package. It passed with 68% of the voters, and I think it's important to note that the green transportation options were all more popular than the parking garage. So more evidence that we are winning. And now voters in Wake Forest can look forward to an extension of this trail that you see below, linking it to a whole countywide network of trails. That's the trail The next type of local funding that I want to talk about is sales taxes. It's important because it's really very large amounts of funding that are available. This won't apply to you if you live in one of the states that prohibit local sales taxes. Another issue is that a strong argument against sales taxes is that it's a flat tax and it's regressive. For example, $5 on $100 worth of stuff is a lot more to someone who makes $15 an hour than it is to a millionaire. But there are some good counter arguments to that. One is that if groceries are excluded from the sales tax, low-income people spend most of their disposable income on food and rent, so sales tax won't impact them very much. Another argument is that the expenditures of the sales tax, and this is true only if you prioritize infrastructure in low-income communities. It's another reason to be careful about our expenditure plans to make sure that we prioritize low-income communities so that the impact of the sales tax isn't regressive. I have an example of that coming up. But first, an example of a state where they weren't allowed to impose a local sales tax, but they changed the law in 2010 and in 2015 to let counties add an additional 1 cent for transportation purposes. Let's look at Fulton County. Its governing body put 3/4 of 1 cent sales tax on the ballot. It was expected to raise $546 million in 5 years. Critically, the county governing body allocated much of that money directly to the cities within the county by population and let those cities decide how they wanted to spend it. That makes it easy for local folks to get access to that funding. The town of Milton, for example, got allocated at least $29 million. That's $6 million a year for this relatively small town in Fulton County, Georgia. This chart shows what Milton did with it. And you can see that bike ped improvements got about a full quarter of the funding, which is fantastic. And that $8 million is what it will raise. That'll help pay for a new path along this road leading from a school to a beautiful 9-mile-long Big Creek bikeway. There you go. That road on the left is not a nice place to ride a bike, but it will have an adjacent side path so that those kids can get to that path, thanks to the sales tax. The next one I want to talk about is Alameda County. This sales tax has been around for a long time. First approved in 1986, mostly for highway expansion. It was renewed in 2000, but by then, bike advocates in the Bay Area had made an impact, and 6% was set aside for bike safety. In 2012, officials, when it came time to renew the measure, officials doubled the amount to a full cent. They increased the bike set aside to 11% and made it permanent instead of making it expire in 15 years. It didn't pass, experts think, because that permanence was not something that the voters liked. It lost by 720 votes, just short of the 2/3 that it needed to win. But bike advocates supported it strongly back then, and they made an impression because when the officials came back 2 years later with another try, this time making it just a 15-year effort, they increased the bike set aside even more. And bike and safety and active transportation got a full 12.5% of the ballot measure. In other words, nearly $1 billion for active transportation. That's a lot of money in one county over 15 years. And we got it because bike advocates made coalition with other groups, just like the story in Austin. And they insisted on a significant allocation in exchange for their support of the ballot measure. And officials understood that support from the bike advocates, the organizations and the coalition, was very valuable. And again, while the bike advocates made the difference, they didn't do it by campaigning for bikes. You look at the signs, their signs say nothing about bikes. It's better BART, better bus, better roads. Yet the officials know that the bike advocates were a big reason why it passed. And this is what we have to look forward to. I can't wait. This fantastic new trail through deep East Oakland, formerly red line, segregated neighborhood, which desperately needs public investments like this, is going to receive some great sales tax money from Measure BB. People who need to take their bikes on BART will have bike parking at the BART stations. And this is the trail that I was talking about through deep East Oakland, and those are the bike parking at the BART stations. Now I want to talk about gas taxes. Historically, primary source of funding for transportation. Two issues to address with gas taxes. First of all, many states don't allow gas tax revenue to be used for active transportation. Illinois was one of those states, but in 2021, the legislature introduced a bill to redefine highway. The Illinois law restricts the gas tax to highways, but as of 2021 in Illinois now, highway includes sidewalks and bike paths. I suspect that the proponents of that change used the federal government policy as an argument, as the federal gas tax has been a flexible source of funding available for active transportation ever since the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act was signed by President Bush in 1991. The other issue about gas taxes is its declining importance, frankly. Revenues are decreasing because of inflation and also because people are buying less gas as electric cars take a bigger market share. Good example of addressing this issue is from Minnesota, where they indexed the gas tax to inflation, and that's going to raise 77 million bucks a year for Minnesota. So another example of Minnesota leading the country in terms of transportation policy. Now to move on to the next source, road fees and road tolls and congestion fees. They're like gas taxes in a way, in that they have been a primary source of funding historically for a long time, and are also often restricted to just motor vehicle transportation. It really depends on who's issuing the tolls, on what the toll authority is. Sometimes governments will give a private concession to a toll authority in exchange to maintain the road. Those deals are not helpful to us. There's the infamous one in Chicago where Mayor Daley gave up parking fees to a private concession is an example of what not to do. But where the public has authority over tolling, which is most places, you can raise significant revenue. Let's look at Los Angeles. In 2012, the Los Angeles Metro agreed to build express lanes that would be tolled in order to keep them fast moving. They established a policy that net revenue could support projects within 3 miles of the highway. A broad coalition of organizations went to the boring public meetings of the LA Metropolitan Transportation Agency and testified to the need for funding for active transportation in that neighborhood, and they won a commitment of 40% of the funds. So that's a lot of money to support projects like this bike path in Crenshaw, which is an often neglected neighborhood of Los Angeles, funded by express lane fees, or expansion of bike share in downtown LA, or this state-of-the-art bike parking facility near Union Station, the Metro Bike Hub, all paid for by express lane fees. The next source up is ride-sharing fees. We'll look to the example of Massachusetts, where a bill in 2016 imposed a fee on all Lyft and Uber rides and declared that half of that fee goes to the city where the trip originated in Boston. They got $4.2 million a year out of that. And that funded an expansion of Boston's Blue Bike system. Now we're going to talk about special districts. There were 3 of them on that list. The most common is an infrastructure financing district funded by property tax increments. The rationale is simple. Good infrastructure increases property values, we can predict the increase in property tax revenue as a result and use that increase, the increment that represents that increase, to pay for the infrastructure that improves property value. The public agency can issue bonds to borrow against that predicted revenue to build the infrastructure. A great example is the Atlanta Beltline, which is funded by the incremental increase in property tax from properties near the project. They did have to make a deal to share the additional revenue with the school districts in order to get their support for a change in state law, which was necessary to use some of the property tax revenue for infrastructure instead of giving it all to schools. That's a successful amendment of the Constitution in Georgia. The budget for the Atlanta Beltline is $4.4 billion, and they're going to spend at least $246 million of that on bike trails. It's a fantastic project. We're going to see more of construction, like you see there on the left, to build more trails, like you see on the right. The next special district is a business improvement district. Very, very common, usually funded by a special fee on businesses in the district, approved by a majority of property owners in that district. In the case of Boise, Idaho, the district is managed by another nonprofit, the Downtown Boise Association, raise about $1 million a year in annual revenue on streetscape improvements like that one. So the downtown businesses realize the value of bicycling and other streetscape improvements and are taxing themselves to pay for it. And then finally, another kind of special district is the parking benefit district. In this case, a special district is set up to spend revenue from parking fees in that district. It's a great way to convince people to support increased parking charges because they have a say in how that revenue is spent. Austin, Texas is a great example of a parking benefit district. Neighborhood associations there can request PBD and control the revenue. And this is the key: as long as 51% of the net revenue is used to support active transportation projects. Really encourage folks to set up parking benefit districts in their community. In Austin, they're getting a lot of bike parking using their car parking revenue. How perfect is that? Now, just for a couple of unusual funding sources, and then we'll get to discussion. Developer requirements and fees. Folks are aware that developers often have to build public infrastructure on or near their property as a condition of approval. That's another reason to have your bike plans ready so that a developer can build part of it. Another less common way is to have generalized fees like exist in Sacramento. This is the chart there shows the fees imposed on developments that are transportation mitigation fees. Importantly, affordable housing is exempt from those fees. And then here's a cool one. In Massachusetts, there's an unused utility corridor fee. This is meant as an incentive for local governments to develop those unused utility corridors into trails. The bill authorized local jurisdictions to tax those corridors, and as a result, we're going to see things like the Swampscott Rail Trail. That's a picture of what it looks like now, the unused, and a map of the unused utility corridor that will soon be a trail. And then finally, the last one, the millionaire's tax. Massachusetts passed millionaire's tax in just last year. Question 1 was a 4% tax on income over $1 million and will raise $1.5 billion for education and infrastructure. The measure restricted the expenditures to those two sources and gave the legislature the authority to be more specific than that. So that's a lot. I just listed 12 different funding sources. Like I said, you don't have to remember any of them. They're all on our website in the Legislative Strategies Guide. But here are some takeaways that I think are important. One is that there's really plenty of money. We listed 12 different sources, many of which have the potential to increase funding dramatically for bike infrastructure. The point is, have your plans ready and don't let the authorities tell you that there's no money to build the bike infrastructure that you know you need. Get that sucker approved and planned and advocate for it, and you can find the money. We can help you find the money. The next takeaway is to put equity first. Where organizations have gotten significant amounts of funding, they have always prioritized low-income communities. When organizations center equity, bikes come out ahead. And then finally, the places where significant funding came for bike infrastructure, it was part of a coalition and effort that wasn't just about bikes or even primarily about bikes. It was about community. So don't center the bike, center the community and the benefits that will come from funding bike infrastructure. So that's the presentation, Ashley. I would love to have as much of a discussion as we can have here in the next few minutes.
Yeah, we are doing great on time. So we are actually going till 11:45 Mountain today for folks that are in the Mountain time zones. So we have a little bit of time, and we don't have to take the full time if we don't need it. But I have a few questions for the audience, from the audience, that I'd love to ask you, Dave. I'll put your contact information on the screen so folks have it in their pocket while we're discussing. But if folks have additional questions, reminder, please use the Q&A feature of the chat. I know we have a couple questions already, but please keep the questions rolling through there. First question I have for you, Dave, that this was actually submitted in the registration page, but somebody asked, what's the best way to advocate for bike infrastructure funding when you live in a small town?
Same way as when you live in a big town. Find allies who care about their community and understand that the infrastructure will help their community, and get them to join you in advocating for the infrastructure. Don't rely just on bicyclists. Maybe the bicyclists will do most of the work and be the leaders, but they shouldn't be the voice or the face of the effort.
Great. One other question, you were mentioning creative coalitions, having really smart campaign strategy and how you're marketing. I guess the first tier to my question is, what advice would you give to somebody who's starting off fresh and looking to build that coalition? How would they go about doing that?
Oh gosh, I wish I could just have a conversation with them. I mean, listen. What are they interested in? What moves your allies? And focus on the benefits and the changes that your allies want to see, and start there.
Great.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
I just want to, Ashley, I just want to encourage you to invite Martina or others too to speak up if anyone has any anything to add.
We got a couple other sneaky colleagues on the call. If you'd like to hop on, please do. I think another important piece to that is maybe diversifying your coalition. Maybe not all the normal transportation advocates, but there might be other advocates that can benefit. So looking for unique ways to build the coalition and your support. One other question we have from an attendee here: are there any unique sources for cities that are considered rural? We are a small community with a lot of potential for biking, but we are starting close to zero in terms of infrastructure and identified funding sources. So similar maybe to small town, but any specific advice for rural communities?
Specific advice? No.
I can jump in, Dave, if it's
Yeah, go
helpful.
ahead. Go ahead. Thank you.
So there's two federal sources that come to mind that you might already be familiar with, but one is the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, which is for all communities, rural and urban, to develop action plans to help you start to figure out where you need to make improvements and get you in the pipeline to get those improvements designed, get the community input you need, get the plan together, and then go after the construction dollars. So it's kind of a process where you can apply at any phase in that. And if you need help all the way from the beginning, you can apply for those planning dollars. And there's also more specifically the Rural Surface Transportation Grant Program from USDOT that obviously is something that's applicable to rural communities to help them with all kinds of projects, ranging from road projects, but can also include road safety type improvement projects like bike lanes.
Great, thank you. And that was Martina Haggerty, our other colleague here at PeopleForBikes on the call that helps lead our great bike infrastructure project. So thank you, Martina. On the creative strategy, campaign side of things, JP asks, oh, corgis, they never stop. What are key elements in branding for bike ped success that don't have bike ped in the name? So going back to, not putting bike as the center of your campaign strategy and the narrative, but finding other creative ways to communicate your campaign strategy while achieving your bike success in the end. Any other global thoughts on that?
Well, safe mobility for all is what they called it in Austin, Texas. And there's a reason why safe routes to school is so popular a program pretty much everywhere in the country. Children and safety are way better elements to feature than bicycling or walking.
In Providence, the local coalition, instead of being called the Bicycle Coalition, is called the Providence Streets Coalition. So it's focusing more on multimodal improvements. But of course, bike infrastructure is a huge part of what they do. And they also called their master plan the Great Streets Master Plan. So instead of a bike master plan, it was talking about streets and more than just bikes as part of the improvements.
Great.
Yeah, and thank you, Adam, for your comment about the value of developer mitigations. That references the takeaway that I wanted people to remember. Get your plans ready because the funding can come. And in this case, you're talking about where you have a developer going to build something in a certain part of your city. If you already have plans for a bikeway, you can get the developer to build that bikeway for you. If you don't have that plan in place, you're going to miss out on that opportunity. The developer's going to build something, and then later you're going to come back and say, "Oh, we need a bike facility there," and you've missed your chance. So, get those plans rolling.
We have a couple asks for the legislative guide that we've been referring to. I'll include that in the notes with a link to the recording as well. But Martina or Maddie, if you could drop that in the chat for folks so they can get it quickly, that would be wonderful. We have an interesting question, and Dave, if you see one you would prefer to answer, but here's one from Tommy. I just wanted to ask about opinions on tactical urbanism and any experiences we have with implementing it as a planning tool. Any thoughts on tactical urbanism?
Yeah. In fact, in California, the Caltrans has created a special set aside in its active transportation program, which is the main program for biking and walking for quick build projects, which is not exactly tactical urbanism, but it's it provides funding for temporary quick build projects. And then there's a program in the Southern California Association of Governments that is nothing but tactical urbanism that I can find you more information about. I don't have it at the tip of my tongue, but I'm happy to send it out in a follow-up. They provide funding to community organizations to do tactical urbanism.
The at the federal level, the Safe Streets and Roads for All program from USDOT also, I believe, is funding quick build projects through that, which is huge, big transformation to be able to use federal dollars for quick build projects. So that's definitely worth checking out. And then I would also encourage folks to look at the work that Jersey City has been doing. They've really done a lot of work at building out, sort of a quick build network, government-sponsored tactical urbanism, if you will, over time, and then slowly going back and building upon those improvements. But it's been a great approach to get a whole network out there much faster than you might with more permanent materials.
And here's one more question. I'm not sure, team, if you can answer, but an anonymous attendee asked, can you verify whether designs are eligible as part of the planning grant for Safe Streets for All?
Yeah. So Safe Streets for All, you can apply for just a planning grant to develop an action plan and do the community engagement work. You can apply for one that does that and design work, I believe, or you can apply for like sort of advanced engineering and construction work, I think. You can check out their website. They've got it all listed in their notice of funding availability, but it's pretty flexible, I think.
Great. Dave or team, was there any other, I think we got them all, but was there any other notes you wanted to comment on or questions?
Just posted a link that somebody requested. And thank you, Gabriel, for your suggestion for session about planning. We'll consider that. That's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd like to underscore again, so many engaged folks on the call. We had said it at the top of the hour, but our Great Bike Infrastructure program has many resources. We are actively looking to support projects all across the country. We have a list of priority states we're working in, but if there is a project happening in your community that needs greater awareness and help from our supporters on the ground to email their policymakers or planners or whomever the decision maker is, saying that they support the project, or just greater support from People for Bikes in general, please reach out to Dave, his email on the screen, and we'd love to chat. Great. Well, any remaining thoughts for the group for the webinar today?
Thank you, Ashley, for making this happen every so often.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you everybody for tuning in. Again, this will be sent out, the recording, later today. And if there's any other questions we weren't able to get to, please email Dave, or you can respond to my email later today and we can follow up. But thank you so much for the time. We'll have a few more webinars, a handful more webinars on the Great Bike Infrastructure Project and the pillars of this campaign going into 2024. So plenty more opportunities to engage and learn. But as always, feel free to reach out anytime and we are happy to chat. Thank you so much. I hope everybody has a good rest of your week and a good weekend and happy holidays.
Thank you, Ashley. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.